Everyone, I'm here with Susan Heaton-Wright, superstar communicator, and today we're going to be talking about failure. Yes, the dreaded F word, but how you can turn a failure or a flop into something that is a success or a learning for you. Now, why are we doing this now? It's because coming up is the International Day for Failure. More of
Yay!
that in a minute. Yay! More of that later. Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you very much for having me on this wonderful failure webinar. I'm Susan, I'm Susan Heaton-Wright, and my company is Superstar Communicator. We empower everybody to present the best version of themselves in business conversations, whether
Mm.
this is pitching, whether it's sharing opinions, being in meetings, presentations, public speaking, all of those things.
Mm.
And the aim is for everybody to present their best version of themselves so that they are remembered, that they demonstrate credibility and influence others.
And I'm sure in public speaking and speaking in general, isn't it true there's a statistic that more people fear public speaking than death itself?
I know, it's
So I
just
suspect you deal
crazy.
in this area a lot of helping people recalibrate.
Absolutely. And one of the things is that people will say, come off stage or finish presenting and they feel it's a failure because they've forgotten to say something or that they forgot a word or had a pause.
Mm.
And the reality is that even if they think it's a failure, and when you come off stage anyway, you know
Adrenaline.
your adrenaline drops, and so you're quite vulnerable to
Yeah,
to be quite ruthless about yourself. The reality is that the audience is not going to know that you missed a word or you
mm.
forgot a point or you paused. They might think that you were being dynamic and having a dramatic pause. And
Mm.
so sometimes it is a case of perception, isn't it? That, and we think of this with success as well, that somebody might think they're hugely successful, and yet another person might perceive that position as, oh, well, that's a failure. I haven't got to this place.
Absolutely. And I find also in the work that I do, because I work with teams, leaders, senior leaders to really help them build their confidence and resilience. Because as you well know, and as we all know, life is not a straight line, and particularly business in this day and age, it's always changing, always moving. And I find that I have clients who are really willing to sit and reflect and think about, what can I learn from this situation? For example, if there's been a restructure, if they've been made redundant. So I do outplacement work for people. They see it as a real springboard for growth, and they're happy to look at it in the context of what's happened in the organization, but maybe where can I change some of my behaviors? Where can I change my approach? And then for some people, I find they're not quite ready to go there yet. Now, sometimes things happen, and I'll share some examples of where redundancy or corporate changes come out of the blue. And it's actually not necessarily you've done anything wrong, but maybe it's an opportunity to build that resilience and learn and grow, similar to when you're working with clients on speaking and presenting. But it's very interesting, the origins of the International Day for Failure, which actually the UK does support. So very interesting there, because I think we're not always willing to admit our own mistakes and missteps. But anyway, it came from Finland, from the University of Aalto, where the School of Entrepreneurship, the students there realised that actually entrepreneurs weren't really ready to admit failure or speak about adversity. And I'm sure, as you know, as a business owner, there's lots of ups and downs in running your own business. So they wanted to increase the dialogue around adversity. They also had support from the founder of Angry Birds, Peter, let me get his name right, Peter Vestetta Becker, I think I'm saying his name right. Apologies if that's not right. Little misstep there. But the founder of Angry Birds was really, really
Wow.
interested in this, helped them galvanize. And it's been going since 2013. And they're trying, the students and the School of Entrepreneurship at the university in Finland are trying to get it recognized as an internationally recognized day by UNESCO, etc. So interesting.
It's
Yeah.
so interesting. But before we carry on,
Yes.
you haven't introduced what you do.
Oh, yes. So thank you, Susan. So I'm a leadership coach. I had, wow, about 20 plus years in corporate life. Reached board level by the time I was 30, I think just to sheer tenacity and resilience. And then I decided I wanted to do something different. So I moved into freelancing. There's a whole story about that, contracting, and then 10 years ago became a coach. So I help senior leaders really face stress and burnout, what's causing it, what's causing conflict, and really help to turn those things into positives to move forward to help their team perform, to build that confidence, build that resilience. And positive psychology tells us today that resilience is actually the number one skill set we need in life these days, the ability to bounce back. So I think what we're talking about today plays very well into that whole theme. So, yeah.
Do you know, it was interesting because earlier this week, somebody that I follow on LinkedIn and whom I highly respect, said that he had met up with a number of other people that he graduated with for the 30th anniversary of when they graduated.
Mm,
And he said that most of the people had not had one career, and that he felt that that was because as Gen Zers, Gen Xers, late Gen Xers, they had felt that there wasn't that need to have a job for life. And in
yeah.
fact, I came back to it and I said, I thought that was really interesting. And in fact, we went to the same university, but he was
Mm,
younger than me. I said we had a similar thing, and I would say that the men all tried to keep to one job or one profession, whereas
mm,
the women have had a series of jobs, and
that's
which was yeah, it was a small sample, but
yeah.
I felt we both felt that was quite interesting. I think that there's a possibility that the era that I went to university, so I graduated at the end of the 80s, there was still a perception that female graduates, oh, go and be a PA in the city.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Yes.
later on, perhaps where, very, very bright women, perhaps later on, they decided, guess what? I want to do something else. Whereas the
Yeah.
men were focused on very much on more on a profession.
Mm. And I think I read a number, it was a couple of years ago now, so it may well have changed, that you can have up to 7 different careers if you count sort of forks in the road where you might not change complete direction, but some direction. But I've certainly worked with people, for example, I went through a phase of working with people in the legal profession, and a number of them, as you can imagine, were suffering with burnout,
Yes.
really on their knees. And some of them went off in a completely different direction. And I think it is a generational piece. I mean, certainly when I was brought up, I think my parents are baby boomers. And I still remember school when you had the cane corporal punishment, and the mindset, I think, around that time is just get on with it, pull your socks up and get on with it. Now, that
Yes.
can be useful and it does build in a certain resilience, but it was too much about, well, stop navel gazing, stop complaining. We're not talking about navel gazing here, but we're talking about, well, there's a real psychological benefit in taking a step back and thinking, could I have done something differently here? Is it time for a change? Do I need to adapt some behaviours? Do I need help from other people? So there's a real balance there, I think. But I agree with you, things do shift throughout the generations. And
Yes. I think
mm,
you've hit a really interesting point because my parents, Yeah, my late father and my mother, well, my mother is 89 now, so she was
Mm,
born just before the Second World War, and they're called the silent generation and
that's
must,
right.
mustn't grumble. So,
Yes.
I was made redundant, um, and I was told not to tell my mother because it would be too traumatic for her. And the messages were that I was a failure. It was
Mm,
one of the best things that happened to me because I then went to music college to train as an opera singer, which
yeah.
was, I got so much joy from it. And although it was a shock at the time, and to be honest, they didn't deal with it well, they got rid of the entire marketing and sales department because they weren't getting the sales, when in fact they'd actually said PCs will never take off. So the problem,
No. Oh
the
dear.
failure was on their
Polish that
part.
crystal ball. There's some dust on it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Good
yeah.
grief.
But very much I had the message, if anything happened, even getting a detention, it was a disaster. I
Oh
was
yeah,
a
you're a
failure.
bad person. Yeah,
Yes. And
absolutely.
I've had to work quite hard to reframe that, to say,
Mm,
you know what? Yeah, I'm disappointed. Yeah, it hurts because sometimes it does hurt to be dumped by somebody or to be rejected for your application. But you step back and say, okay, what do I need to adjust this?
yeah.
It can be a huge gift.
I had a really interesting experience earlier. I think this was in the 90s. All the years seem to merge into one,
I
but
know
once you
it.
start gathering a few of them. Anyway, so I had this bucket list from quite a young age. My dad was quite unwell when we were growing up, and it made me quite driven and to think
Yes.
about go for what you want. So I was like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Now, before I even knew or decided, I had no idea when I left uni, but on my bucket list was to be an air stewardess or cabin crew, as we now say. And I'm talking about the days when you would have to step on the scales before they would let you on the plane. There was a height and a weight chart. So it was just of the times. And it was a 6-month contract because I knew it wasn't my forever job. But I must have loved all those 70s disaster movies with the air hostesses or stewardesses. I
And then
loved
she
all of
pulls
those
us,
films.
and
And
then
I'd
she
be in a
pulls the
crisis.
pilot.
Yeah. So anyway, I had this 6 months contract. I have so much respect for cabin crew because they have to know, like that, where all the safety equipment is. They work really hard. It's a tough job. And I remember at the end of my 6 month contract, they used to call them the number ones, one of the chief pursers said, look, Sarah, unfortunately, we're not going to be extending your contract. Now, even though a part of my brain was saying, well, this isn't your forever job, I was really upset. It was one of my earliest rejections face to face. And I remember really disappointed by that. But then when I took a moment and reflected, I thought, come on, Sarah, that's your ego getting in the way. You knew it was a summer job. You knew you wanted to move on to other things. And actually, bless her, the purser grabbed me afterwards and she said, you've got other things in mind, Sarah. You'll get bored here. And I thought, you know what?
Yeah.
What great thing to say. I always remember that moment. But it
Yeah.
did feel like a major rejection at the time. Mm,
How interesting.
mm.
That even though you didn't want to do it for forever, that you didn't want that as your career. There's that, oh,
I think it's about, I think basically a lot of us like to be in control
yes.
of
Yeah,
things.
that could be it.
And
You
some,
have those arguments where somebody, you typically get them on soap operas when
mm,
somebody says, you're fired. No, in fact, I'm
yeah,
firing you.
exactly, exactly, exactly. And I think some people are very overt, and for some people, control is a really high value. And as long as it's not exerted in the wrong way, that's fine. But I think we do like to feel safe and secure. I think our brains are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So when we look at failures, flops, missteps, mistakes, it really hits that psychology.
Yes.
Do you agree? Yeah,
Absolutely. And don't you feel that as human beings, we are sociable animals? And
mm,
so if we're rejected, we're being rejected from a community, essentially.
absolutely. Social stigma, the
Yes,
social
it's very
stigma.
difficult,
Yeah.
very difficult to cope with.
And I think there's a lot of, it's different in different societies, that whole social conditioning piece. It's different in different communities, but there's still a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of fear. The ego gets in the way when something like that happens to us. And there's parts of our brains that fire up when we face that rejection, even if it's somewhere deep down, we know it might be the best for us. The amygdala goes a bit haywire. It's that fight or flight response or even freeze. And then our brain can't stay in its rational thinking place.
There's another part to that. There's fight and flight,
Yeah,
and fear and freeze, but
yeah.
there's also fawn, as
Mm.
in Bambi. Um,
Oh,
you know how when you've got a boss who's being tyrannical and you become, like a fawn, yes, slightly frightened, but
that's interesting.
and that's been identified in the last couple of years as a
Mm.
as a feature. And and it makes absolute sense, doesn't it?
It does. Funny how all these words begin with F.
Yes. And I'm sure that there's a reason for
The
that.
reason for it, yeah. So, have you got any other examples, Susan, of situations you've been in where it felt maybe a bit catastrophic, or it was a failure and you grew from it, or was it a failure and you were in the doldrums? I'd love to hear about your stories.
Oh, well, one of them, I don't know if I've ever told you that I managed to persuade my university that I was interested in joining in the Navy. And
Right.
okay,
I
yeah,
don't know this one.
no, no. In fact, when I had been in Finland working once in the summer, age 19, there was another girl there called Margaret. She was great. She was from Glasgow, really got on well with her. And she said, "Hey, Susan, you've got to apply for this thing. It's an acquaintance weekend, and you get to stay in one of the the land stations of the Navy, and you may or meet all these blokes in uniform."
How awful.
How awful. I mean, so hard. I'm anyway, I managed the to persuade the careers department at the university that I was interested in this, and
Hmm.
I got on it. I traveled first class from Durham down to Portsmouth. I was picked up by a car, treated like royalty. And the idea was that we would be acquainted with um, the leadership roles, or the officer roles for women that were available at the time. So, as I say, this was the late 80s. There were very few opportunities. However,
Hmm.
it became quite apparent that there were a couple of marriages from the officers and a couple of the women that were on the group with me. I think there were 8 of us. There were 3 marriages, I think. But one night they had a formal dinner and they were passing around the port and, more drink and more like that. I stood up afterwards and I literally slipped under the table because I was so drunk.
Oh, Susan. On Paul, honestly. Oh dear. And what happened after that? Did you just want to curl up and hide,
Oh,
or did
absolutely. I
somebody
wanted to
help you?
hide. I wanted to hide under the table, to be perfectly honest. I was helped up and they said, "Oh, the floor got polished today." But I didn't
Yeah.
get any marriage proposals.
Well, yeah, maybe there's a reason for that, but
Yeah, I
maybe
know
it led to
exactly.
your marriage now, because it sounds all a bit Strictly Come Dancing, doesn't it? When people coupling up. So maybe that was a lucky break or a
Oh,
lucky,
oh, it
a
was,
lucky slide. Yeah.
but I felt, just
Embarrassed.
cringe at the
Cringe.
thought of it.
Yeah, I had something. it only came to my mind this morning, actually, when I was thinking of it. I'd completely forgotten about it. When I was in sixth form college, I was in the drama society. So the drama group, we used to do improvisation and productions. And there was myself and another girl who were doing it was a two-person play, if you like. I think it was called Neighbours. And I don't mean the Australian soap opera. There were no Paul Robinsons hanging around, but it was about sort of things going on in society at the time. And I was quite in awe of this person that I was working with. You know, she's very much, oh, yes, I've done lots of this before. This is how we need to do it. This is how we need to do it. And you know me, I'm quite outspoken sometimes, but I was probably a bit fawny, you know, and I thought, great, she's got all this experience. I'm just happy to listen and learn from it. Anyway, come the night, curtains go up, we start our play, our mini play for about 20 minutes, whatever it was. We took a section of it and she completely froze. I mean, when
Oh,
I say
no.
completely, we started off and we'd rehearsed, we'd done everything possible. She's had a lot of experience before, and the poor girl just froze. I think she uttered one sentence. So I thought, this is down to me. So I remembered my lines and kind of improvised on the hoof, on the foot. You know, I just sort of
Bless you.
improvised, made it come together. We got a massive round of applause, and literally two of the teachers came up afterwards and said, well done, Sarah, that was brilliant. I could really feel the tension that was about that play about social and racial injustice. And I thought, yeah, you probably could feel some tension. You know, it wasn't it was about the play, but phew, got away with it. So I remember that. And if I think about it now, that was probably an early sign of, well, I quite like speaking, quite like doing
Yes.
videos, I'm quite extrovert. So maybe that was a sign, a learning.
Yeah, it could have been. And also the fact that you were able to come up with a quick solution.
Mm, mm, yeah. Have you got any other examples that
Do
you?
you know, there's one that has just struck me, and that was pre-pandemic. And I was asked by an organization, I'm not, and this is a professional organization,
Mm,
um, and I had to audition for half an hour to discuss presentation skills, public speaking skills. You know,
it's
I
what you
know my
do.
stuff. I know my
Yeah.
stuff. And the afterwards, about a week later, I had an email which was the most vicious, nasty rejection I have ever had. That questioned not only my credibility, my knowledge, my ability to train, and me personally. Now, I have no problem if my face doesn't fit within an organization. I really don't have a problem with that, as I'm sure you would agree with that,
Mm,
because it depends what they're looking for.
yes.
However, it was the nature of the language that was used that was crushing. I genuinely felt that I wanted to hide under my table and sob because it was so nasty.
Mm,
And I actually reached out to my friend who is a professor of psychology at a university, and she said, and I sent her the email, and she said, the problem isn't yours, it's hers. Clearly, she was triggered by something or felt that she needed to be really nasty.
mm. It's very interesting, isn't it? Sort of making sense of the feelings for both yourself and that other person.
Yeah, I mean, I have no responsibility for that person at all.
It's interesting because we've all got triggers, we've all got hot buttons. It's about recognizing them, I think, taking a step back and realizing we quite often say somebody pushed my buttons, and that can be the case. And it's a great opportunity to reflect and think, okay, do I need to look at that? Has it pushed my button? or is it somebody else's button that doesn't belong to you at all, which it sounds like it was, you know.
Yeah. I mean, if I'd been in that position, maybe didn't like me, or I have no problem with that. You say, thank you very much. Here's the feedback. We're not going to take it any further, but thank you for your time.
It's
Or
interesting.
something
Mm.
professional.
Exactly. And I don't know, you probably sort of see this with your clients if they're getting feedback on their speaking or you're giving feedback, another F word. This is one of the areas that comes up time and time again in coaching because I think sometimes people aren't very comfortable about giving feedback. So maybe they get a bit worried about it and it comes out the wrong way, or people misinterpret feedback. Because for me, even if it's something where somebody needs to course correct, you can still deliver it in an empowering way. Like failure, it's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to grow. And I had a similar experience last year, actually. It was for another project, not directly related to coaching. And I just got this very brutal feedback, but because I knew the person and I said, okay, then, well, look, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. So I was thinking on my feet, proposing solutions, wasn't having any of it, just slam, slam, slam. And I just kept my composure and said, could you be a bit more specific, please? Could you give me a specific example? Could we stick to the actual report that was produced rather
Yes.
than and they didn't like it because I think the other person was motivated by authority, control, power, well known for that. And I thought, actually,
Yeah.
Sarah, there's a choice here. I don't really want to be working with that sort of person. Yes, we all disagree. Yes, we all get busy. But if you're somebody, I think feedback just gets so messy. Some of my clients come, quite frankly, bruised from it, you know.
Yeah, I think that you've got a good point. And whether it is the time and place for feedback.
Correct.
So in the situation that
Mm.
I'm explaining, which yeah, it was a failure. I was rejected from that opportunity, probably a blessing. Certainly, um, I escaped something pretty toxic. But was it appropriate to start questioning my abilities? I know what I produced. It was of very high quality, the latest research, or all of those things.
Mm.
I know that I can deliver it well and things, but she made it very, very personal. Was it appropriate? No.
No, because that's
She was,
not talking about the activity, that's talking about you as a person.
yeah,
And I would argue you shouldn't really be giving feedback like that on email anyway. That has to
no,
be face to
absolutely.
face and a
No,
discussion about this is what we're going to talk about because some of us are reflective thinkers. Not everybody can think on their feet. Sometimes I can recalibrate, not always, but I can keep it. But we shouldn't really be doing that on
no,
email. And there's always two sides to a story, but
absolutely.
it sounds like your sort of takeaway from that was, okay, that wasn't great, but a blessing in disguise. And the same for that situation I described. I just thought, I don't want to work for people like that. I didn't in my in-house career, and I have confronted people, that have been over the top with me, rightly or wrongly, but I'm like Scrappy Doo in Scooby Doo, the little dog that goes, "Arr," I'll
And
always stand up for myself.
maybe that failure can be the lucky escape
Of
failure.
course, of course. And I remember when I was working in a company, it was a medical device. I was working, no, what was it in? Medical nutrition. And I took this role. It was a fantastic role, opportunity. I wasn't necessarily wanting to stay in a permanent role by that time, but I thought, you know what, this gives me a chance to grow into government affairs, stuff that I really wanted to do at the EU level. Thought, fantastic, I'll do it. But I'm only going to do it for 3 years. talk about manifestation. 3 years later, within 1 week, I'd won this CEO award for a program, a recognition program I'd designed with HR, onboarding recognition. Literally, about a week, 2 weeks later, redundancy.
Oh no.
Seriously, I mean, I've got quite, I'd like to think, a lot of the time, a good sense of humour. I laughed because I thought, talk about manifestation. It was literally almost 3 years to the date from when I joined. And when I joined, I said, I'm only staying for 3 years. You're going to go self-employed. But it was a bit of a shocker, even though in the back of my mind, I knew it was time for a change. You do take a bit of a bashing with it. And I had to allow myself the grace and the time to grieve.
Yes, absolutely. Particularly since you'd won that award
I know.
2 weeks earlier.
It's like that good old line, you can't write this stuff, but it
How
was,
and
mm,
grief is the right word for it. The shock and the grief,
mm,
the sudden cutting off of your employment
yeah,
and you being excluded from the group.
yeah, yeah. And exclusion is a big thing for me. I know that, and I've learned that throughout my career in terms of I like to be included in things. So when I was younger, I used to get involved in everything in my career and wonder why I was so busy. And now I've learned, Sarah, just sit on your hands sometimes. You don't have to be involved in everything. But that exclusion, as you said, because we're community animals to one a lesser
It's
or
the
bigger
massive
degree.
one.
And it is important. It's the whole, the Kubler-Ross grief curve, the
Yes.
emotions that we go through, grief, shock, anger, sadness. And because I knew about that, I'd been reading about it, I was able to understand it and get comfortable being uncomfortable.
But what about those people that aren't able to move forward after a failure,
Yeah,
that they
I
get stuck?
you can do because if you look at how the grief, and it's for any form of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote on grief and grieving or grief and dying. So it's for any divorce, whatever happens in life, bereavement. It's drawn like a line, but I think sometimes you can go backwards and forwards through that, and you sometimes can get stuck in a place. And I've definitely worked with people where perhaps they've always been successful in their career. They've always got the job. They've always won, the promotion, and it happens for the first time. And we have this image of ourselves, don't we? We have an image of ourselves or beliefs about ourselves. And if we've not had the opportunity to question or challenge how we see ourselves, that's a massive thing. I don't know what it's like for you, Susan, but I feel with my clients, whilst I'm working on skills development, leadership, for example, team skills, it's as much about digging into the mindset.
Oh, definitely. You've hit a nail on the head, haven't you? That unless you have experienced failure, if you've been one of those really, really
Mm,
successful people that has, got a degree from an exclusive university, earning high money, or all of
yeah,
those
I
things, and
know.
all of a sudden they are
Mm,
not rated the top
yeah,
dog because everybody's like that. You see that in city firms, don't you? In
you
finance
do.
firms where there's a bell chart for their bonuses. And the reality is that some people are going to be either side of the
Mm, yeah,
um,
I think
and
so.
they're still fantastic people. And in a way, it's not managed correctly
Mm,
because they are going to demotivate some people. But some people take that so badly because they've never experienced it before.
yeah, and then you get, I don't know, again, I don't know if you've experienced this with clients. I think sometimes where that resistance comes in, because when you're working with people, if I just talk about coaching, for example, and development, there's a balance between support and challenging, but not in an aggressive way,
No,
but
of course.
challenging, really looking at the person in front of you about what do I know about this person? How do they like? What language should I use? What tone of voice? What body language or not? So there's that tension between support and challenging your client. And I've found that in those situations where in the middle, there's that tension between the two sometimes where you're wanting to help people. But I've noticed, I think, as I mentioned before, clients that are really happy to go into it because they've been reflecting, they're more internal thinkers and they've already been reflecting upon it. Whereas for other people, they're just not ready to go there yet because it challenges too much of their self-perception.
Yes.
Mm. I've got a funny example I could share with you.
Oh, go on, because I've been sharing all of my stuff.
So I nearly ended up in Madrid with completely the wrong person. I was working when I was first started in my career. I was living in London in the 90s. I think this was after the cabin crew experience. I was working for a small PR firm, loved it, brilliant. And I know this sounds really old school now, but actually having PCs and email, we were still using fax machines to fax press releases
Yeah.
to journalists. I mean, goodness knows where they ended up. But anyway, you'd be standing there doing this. But we had email and it was all quite new, etc. So I wrote an email to my boyfriend at the time saying, "Hi, Nick, I can't wait for our really, I'll just use the word exciting weekend in Madrid." Bang. And then I came back to my desk about an hour later. Well, I got a reply from Nick, but the wrong Nick. It was one of my clients, quite a
Oh,
senior person in a consultancy firm we were helping with PR. And I still laugh about it to this day. I must see if I can find him on LinkedIn. I'm not going to send the same email, but he said, "Well, thank you, Sarah. I'm very flattered, but I better ask my wife first."
oh no.
And
Oh,
I wanted the ground to swallow me up. I thought, I'm going to get fired. This is awful. I've made a really big boo-boo. Oh my goodness. Do I tell anyone? Do I not? Anyway, I sent him an email back and I said, "Hi, Nick." I said, "I'm so sorry. This was a complete mistake. I'm really, really do apologize." And he said, "Sarah, don't worry. It really made my day. It made me laugh."
exactly.
He said it
He
made
dealt
me
with it
laugh.
well. He
Yeah,
was, oh, bless. Oh, how funny.
I know. I better
But
ask my wife first.
but do you think that there are occasions when people make a mistake or have a failure and they try to cover it up?
Yes.
You remember the Baring brothers,
Yes.
and in fact,
Brilliant example.
it, and in fact, by coincidence, one of my ex-clients was one of his managers, and she said, "All I'm worried about is when the film comes out, who plays me?"
Well, yeah, I mean that is it, there are mistakes that we can laugh at, or we can be very philosophical about, but that's a classic example of where mistakes are just ignored and incompetence is rewarded.
Yes. So for anybody who doesn't know what this was
Mm,
about, there was somebody that was hedging bets financially, and he was lying about some of the funds, saying that saying that the losses were not as high as they were. And by the time it was discovered, I think it was millions of pounds, wasn't it?
it was, and I think this was about this. Was it about the same time as? Do you remember WorldCom?
Yes.
Enron,
Yes.
similar things where that was a culture that was set. So I think covering your mistakes in that example is catastrophic. I work in the well, I have worked in the pharmaceutical sector. I coach a lot of people in the pharmaceutical biotech sector. And there is, as you might expect, because it's first do no harm, we're looking at patients, the compliance bar and the regulation, the quality is super, super important. Everything is scrutinized. And, in the past, there's been learnings about, what people have done wrong in the past, inadvertently sometimes, and it is very stringent for the right reasons. And actually, if you look at clinical trials fail. Now, you could say that failure is for a good reason. It may not feel like that if you're the pharmaceutical company that spent many years developing an asset, developing a treatment. That might be, oh gosh, we've invested this amount of money and resources over these years, but actually, that's a good failure, I would say, because it gives you a chance to look at an asset and say, okay, is it more suitable for this patient? Can we
Yes.
use it somewhere else? And there are many drugs that have been developed that failed, but then they've said, hang on a minute, it can help people with this form of cancer or this form of diabetes.
Yes.
So I think those are opposite ends of the spectrum, aren't they? But yeah, absolutely. In organizations, we should be able to discuss failure rather
You
than,
think that within science, obviously
yeah,
pharmaceuticals within the science sector, that part of the whole process is coming up with a hypothesis, and from
yes,
that you are testing it,
yes,
see if that works. And
yes.
if it doesn't, then you know what? You're
Start again,
crossing
have a
that
look.
off. You start again. You
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got the famous examples, what was it? Michael Jordan, cut from
yes,
a basketball team at high school. Oprah Winfrey, told she was too emotional, cut from a chat show. You mentioned Edison, the light bulb,
yes,
tweaking and changing it. Einstein being
yeah.
excluded from the scientific community for a long, long time. Many, many others, many
There are,
others.
lots and lots that you can learn from.
Mm.
Even J.K. Rowling, the success
Yes.
that she is, that she had her manuscripts rejected
Yeah.
many times before she got there. And then
Yeah.
look what happened to her. And I
Yeah.
think the message is you've just got to keep going. If you've got a vision, I mean, obviously reflect back and tweak it,
Mm.
but to continue with that.
I think in terms of failure, how it helps, as you said, course correct, reflect. I think as well, and maybe I'm speaking as a business owner here, get the right help.
Yes,
It's got to be the right help, and I solve the right problems, and decide what you do and what you don't do. Because as an entrepreneur, there's lots of things you can do, especially in this arena of digital marketing and everything else. And I've certainly had a lot of missteps in terms of working with people that's like, do you know what? And trusting yourself to say, I'm not getting the results from this. So
yeah,
I'm sorry, it's another fork in the road or a change or a turn. So we can learn. And also I find I work with a lot of finance and accountancy people, and sometimes lovely, lovely people to work with. They will even admit it themselves. There's a tendency towards perfection because what they do is so regulated, it has to be right. So very detail orientated, very process orientated. But sometimes there is room to let go of perfection.
yeah.
So I think failure can be quite liberating sometimes.
Yes, it can. If you're able to create a culture within your team or your
Mm,
organization that failure is part of success.
absolutely. So I think we're nearly at time, Susan.
We
Anything else
are.
you'd like to share?
Oh no, you're being
No,
nosy now.
I
I
am being
could go on.
nosy.
I'm
Any
not
dark,
going to
deep
share
secrets?
anymore.
Ah, that's it. The
But
sharing is over.
we in our love life, obviously I've been married for 30 years now, but in the past, we do get dumped, don't we?
Oh,
And
yes.
that's always, and you at the time it's devastating, particularly when you're very young.
Yeah.
But you look back and think, hey, that again, a lucky escape.
I think so. And sometimes, again, when I'm working with some of my clients, we do obviously talk about leadership and career, but sometimes when we're looking into mindset and other things going on, we do stray into some of the personal areas. And it's sometimes reframing that if it is a separation, look at it, that if it was good for a certain time, it was good for a certain time. I think the idea that all relationships will last forever and ever and ever isn't the case like it would have been for our generation, rightly or wrongly. And to look at something to say that was good for its time,
Yes.
and now it's time for something else, and to learn and to grow.
And the same for friendships as well,
I think
personal
so.
friendships.
And roles and jobs,
Yes, yes,
career
in all
changes.
areas of our lives.
Okay, so we've recorded this video, which we'll be sharing on social media, videos, different formats. And also, if you're watching this video, we've got a free failure to success checklist. So if you see a post from Susan and myself, just let us know and we're happy to share with you. If you'd like the checklist, just let us know, drop us a direct message or put a comment on one of our LinkedIn posts or social media posts, and we'll be happy to send that to you. It's one pager just about some of the tools you can use to reframe failure. And I think, Susan, this could make a really interesting workshop or talk for
Oh,
organisations.
absolutely. Either to do a masterclass on this or a workshop, particularly for
100%.
leaders, how they could create that
Yes.
that atmosphere, that culture of
Yeah.
success from failure.
Embracing. Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, it's been lovely hearing about your stories. It's such a shame you wouldn't share one more with me, but I'll let you off. I think the story about falling over was quite enough.
Oh,
But yeah, thanks ever so much for your time, Susan, and I'll see you soon. Have a good
take
day.
care. Bye.
Bye.